Fans on their feet. Rally towels are being waved. Brad Lidge stretches. The 0-2 pitch. Swing and a miss. Struck him out. The Philadelphia Phillies are 2008 World Champions of Baseball.
The 2008 Phillies were the epitome of good drafting. With 2 MVPs, a stacked roster, and a heart of gold, they were able to win the 2008 World Series. But the question is, how did they get there? And to do that, we have to go all the way back to 1993. On Saturday, October 23rd of that year, Game 6 of the 1993 World Series kicked off in the Sky Dome. With Toronto holding a 3-2 series lead, Philadelphia had to win this game and find a way to claw back in the series. Toronto strikes first in the bottom of the third, when they drop 3 runs on the Phillies. Then the Phillies followed that up by 1 run in the top of the 4th. In the next 2 innings, Toronto would drop 2 more runs. Now Toronto finds themselves in a 5-1 lead. In the 7th, however, Philadelphia drops 5 runs on Toronto. Now Philadelphia finds themselves in the driver's seat with a 6-5 lead. With 2 men on base, in the bottom of the 9th, the 4-time All-Star Joe Carter steps to the plate. He sits in the box, waits for his pitch, and swings. It's a home run. Joe Carter has just become the first person ever to walk off a World Series, and he's sending all Phillies fans home heartbroken. In the 3 years following Philadelphia's defeat, they fell off a cliff. After losing several key players and underperforming in 1996, they found themselves as a bad team. In 1996, Philadelphia capitalized on their high draft pick. They got Adam Eaton, a solid reliever, with their first-round pick, and Jimmy Rollins, a young shortstop, with their second. One of these players would later blossom and become a superstar and MVP. In 1997, 1998, and 1999, other key Philly players were drafted around the league. This includes Jason Worth with the Baltimore Orioles and Brad Lidge with the Houston Astros. Around 2000, an idea for a new ballpark in Philadelphia was being considered. This ballpark would usher in a new era of Philadelphia baseball. This would be a classic-looking ballpark that would cost around $450 million. Later on in 2000, in the MLB draft, the Phillies selected stud second baseman Chase Utley out of UCLA. As a first-round pick, Utley was a superstar at UCLA, and the Phillies hoped that he'd continue being a superstar well into his major league career. Another big move the Phillies made in 2000 was trading their superstar pitcher, Curt Schilling. Schilling was arguably the best player on the 1993 Phillies, and in recent years he's been fed up with Phillies' mediocrity and losing seasons. So he asked for a trade to a contender. Well, on July 26, 2000, Philadelphia pulled the trigger and traded him to the Arizona Diamondbacks, in exchange for Omar Dahl, Nelson Figueroa, Travis Lee, and Vicente Padilla. For the Phillies, this deal is largely regarded as one of the worst in MLB history. Even though some of these people had minimal success, they didn't do much. And the Phillies pretty much traded a superstar pitcher for a bag of potato chips. There was more highlights for 2000, however. As Jimmy Rollins made his debut with 14 games left in the season, he had 55 plate appearances, 17 hits, and hit .321. Jimmy Rollins was showing star potential, and Philadelphia fans were getting excited. In 2001, Philadelphia made their first real progress in years. Led by Travis Lee, Bobby Abreu, Scott Rowland, and a young stud Jimmy Rollins, Philadelphia had a record of 86-76. A good record, but still not good enough to get into the playoffs. In the 5th round of the 2001 MLB draft, Philadelphia selected little-known first baseman power hitter Ryan Howard. He doesn't do much right now, but we'll certainly get back to him later. Other than that, not much happened in 2001, except for the fact that 1998 first-round pick Pat Burrell is starting to cement himself as a starting fielder for Philadelphia. In 2002, Philadelphia took a step back. With the losing record and really low attendance numbers, Philadelphia found themselves in a hole once again. To make matters worse, Philadelphia traded star third baseman Scott Rowland for virtually nothing. In the first round of the 2002 MLB draft, with the 17th pick, Philadelphia picked Cole Hamels, hopefully their future ace and future key piece of the 2008 team. In 2004, the stadium we mentioned in 2000 is finally built. Its name is Citizens Bank Park. Its chic, red look will certainly represent the future of Philadelphia baseball. To make things even better, the season before Citizens Bank Park was built, Phillies landed superstar first baseman Jim Thome. After a long recruiting process and a whole city rooting to get him, they finally landed him. In 2003, second baseman Chase Utley made his debut and played 43 games. He didn't play really well, but something tells me that he's got some potential and will be pretty good in the future. In the Rule 5 draft of 2004, Philadelphia selected Shane Victorino, the Flying Hawaiian. He will later become one of Philadelphia's outfielders of the future. Oh, and look, a winning record again. Things are finally looking up for the Phillies. In 2005, the Phillies experienced more success. This time only one game out of the wild card and subsequently the playoffs. Part of that was because they fired their manager, Larry Bowa, and hired former Cleveland manager, Charlie Manuel. At times in 2005, a winning record seemed like it wouldn't happen, as superstar first baseman Jim Thome was always injured and missed a lot of time. In his absence, Philadelphia called up first baseman Ryan Howard. Yeah, that kid from earlier. And to sum it up, Ryan Howard went crazy. Howard briefly had to fill in for Thome in 2004, but in 2005, he really had to fill in for Thome. In 88 games, he had 348 plate appearances, 90 hits, 22 home runs, and his batting average was .288. In response to this, Philadelphia traded Jim Thome to the Chicago White Sox for Aaron Rowand and two prospects that wouldn't really play for Philadelphia. Aaron Rowand would put in 2 solid seasons for the Phillies, but would leave before the '08 season. His highlights in Philadelphia include running into a wall. And that's it. In '06, Philadelphia once again missed the playoffs. Former first-round pick Cole Hamels made his debut and was okay, and out of nowhere, Ryan Howard won an MVP. In '06, Howard played 159 games, had 704 plate appearances, had 182 hits, 58 home runs, and he batted .313. An absolutely monster season. With Chase Utley also starting to come into his own as a star, and Jimmy Rollins being a star for a while now, Philadelphia finally had a star core that they could build off of to hopefully win a championship. In 2007, Philadelphia finally made the playoffs. Partly in thanks because of Mets' epic collapse at the top of the division. But anyway, they made it. They lost in the NLDS, but tons of progress was made that was going to help them with experience in 2008. Going down the stretch in 2007, the Mets were a putrid 5-12, while the Phillies were a great 13-4. This Mets collapse might have been one of the worst collapses in MLB history. Thanks to this Mets collapse, the Philadelphia Phillies made it to the NLDS and got booked into the playoffs. In Game 1, they lost 4-2 to the Rockies. In Game 2, they lost 10-5 to the Rockies. And in Game 3, they lost 1-2 to the Rockies. A pretty terrible appearance. but at least they made the playoffs and gained the experience. Oh, and remember when I said earlier that one of Jimmy Rollins and Adam Eaton was going to win MVP? Well, in 07, at age 28, Jimmy Rollins won NL MVP. With 778 plate appearances, 212 hits, 30 home runs, and hitting .296, Jimmy Rollins won MVP. Not as good as Ryan Howard's year, but still certainly a great MVP season. The last thing to happen in 07 is the Phillies acquiring Brad Lidge from the Houston Astros. All they had to give up was 2 random prospects. So I think this trade's gonna work out. So we finally arrived at the 2008 season. But before we head into the regular season, let's look at the roster built up to this point. At catcher, Carlos Ruiz. At first base, Ryan Howard. At second base, Chase Utley. At shortstop, Jimmy Rollins. At third base, newly acquired Pedro Feliz. At left field, Pat Burrell. In center field, Shane Victorino. And in right field, Jason Worth. The rotation consists of Cole Hamels, Brett Myers, Jamie Moyer, Kyle Kendrick, Adam Eaton, Joe Blanton, Chad Durbin, J.A. Happ, and many more. With the roster set and new players acquired, the regular season kicks off, and Philly is hopeful. Philly had done it, their first 90-win season since 1993. It seemed like this team was destined for greatness, and their first day in the playoffs was in the NLDS versus the Milwaukee Brewers. The Milwaukee team that the Phillies were going to play in the playoffs had caught fire down the stretch, led by star pitcher CC Sabathia, who they traded for at the deadline. The Brewers had won the wildcard game and hoped to take this momentum into the NLDS. This wasn't enough, however, as they got clobbered by the Phillies in only 4 games. In the NLCS, Philadelphia ran into the 84-win Dodgers, not necessarily a challenge for Philadelphia, and they took advantage of it, as the Dodgers just weren't very good and Philly beat them in only 5 games. And just like that, Philadelphia has booked their ticket to the World Series, and their opponent is the Tampa Bay Rays. Yes, the Rays that have never made a World Series up until this point. Before we head into this series, there is one thing you should know. Closer Brad Lidge hasn't blown a save all season, and if he can continue this into the World Series, then that would mean he would have a perfect season, never blowing a save, and always being clutch. So that's another question we have to ask ourselves. Will Brad Lidge be able to keep the perfect season alive? So we made it to the World Series, and in the first 4 games, Cole Hamels looks beautiful on the mound, and the Phillies steamroll through the Rays. So it all comes down to Game 5. In Game 5 of the World Series, Cole Hamels took the mound on a rainy night at 8:30 p.m. on October 27th. In the first inning, Philly drops 2 runs on Tampa Bay. In the next couple innings, no runs are scored. Tampa strikes one back in the 4th. In the 5th, it gets too rainy, and they call a rain delay. This delays the game for 2 days. On Wednesday, the game kicks off again, and the first to score is Tampa Bay with 1 run in the top of the 6th. Philly responds with 1 in the bottom of the 6th, and then Tampa Bay once again responds with 1 at the top of the 7th. Now it's tied up, but Philly scores 1 in the bottom of the 7th. Tampa Bay fails to score in the 8th, and the Phillies fail to score in the bottom of the 8th. So it all comes down to the top of the 9th, and Philadelphia puts Brad Lidge in the game. In the top of the 9th, Brad Lidge allows 1 hit and gets 2 outs. And there's only 1 batter left with 2 strikes. Lidge is trying to compete his perfect season and subsequently win the World Series for Philly. He's 1 pitch away from making all the rebuilding worth it. 1 pitch away from getting rid of the memories of Joe Carter. 1 pitch away from cementing his perfect season in the history books. All of the failure and endless rebuilding that Philly has had all comes down to this moment. Brad Lidge steps and throws. It hits Carlos Ruiz's glove. Brad falls to his knees. He has just closed out Game 5 of the World Series to win Philadelphia the championship. And he's just remained perfect. Storybook ending for a wonderful story. And trust me, Philadelphia is definitely going to celebrate this one.